On America Tonight, the help that never came. Sandy's victims still stranded. Our investigation looks at the American Red Cross and the failures that left communities high and dry. An America Tonight exclusive.
What did you think when you got that phone call saying that you were not going to get that money?
It was wrong. I thought it was wrong.
Also tonight, a nation divided. Why Native American communities fear an outside threat that could take their children away.
But I think I get emotional thinking of what was lost with, how many kids we lost already.
And looking back, what the world could have seen. Early signs of Hitler's most evil visions. Good evening and thanks for being with us. I'm Joey Chen. This time a year ago, millions of Americans along the eastern seaboard were still reeling from the most devastating storm in living memory, Superstorm Sandy. In the storm's aftermath, the nation's best-known disaster relief agency, the American Red Cross, sprang to the aid of victims, armed with hundreds of millions of dollars donated by a shocked and sympathetic public. The Red Cross promised to care for survivors and help them recover from the disaster, but it turns out that many have been left wanting. Our exclusive investigative report from America Tonight correspondent Sheila McVicker.
One year on. This is Breezy Point, one of the New York communities most devastated when Hurricane Sandy churned up the East Coast. Waves crashed into homes, the power went out, and then more than 100 houses burned. Visible scars left in piles of drifting sand. Speak to people in New York beach towns like this one, at least those that have been able to return home. And some homes are so badly damaged here they'll never be inhabitable again. And you'll hear story after story of the struggle to get the financial aid desperately needed to completely recover from the storm. Sandy cost the state of New York about $42 billion. And for many families, the personal costs will be a burden to bear for many years. Up and down the low-lying barrier coast, the debris has been cleaned up. There are signs of regeneration. Construction crews are everywhere. But for many of Sandy's victims, the long nightmare of destroyed or damaged homes is not yet over. And the search for help is frustrating, so frustrating.
It was like a lie. There was no reliability. It was just a betrayal.
Rosaline Fernandez is a high school Spanish teacher.
Do you remember the name of the movie?
With her 3 children, she's now living in a tiny apartment. It's all she could find or afford after Sandy.
I had lost everything. I'd lost my car, all the furniture, the kids' clothes.
A block from Jamaica Bay, she lived on the 2nd floor of this building. A year later, still not repaired.
The first floor was completely washed out. There was mold, funky smells, there was water.
Bay water met seawater, met sewage. And then there was the fully stocked deli.
We lived above a deli. There was the food that went bad. It was pretty bad.
And FEMA told you needed to get out?
Yeah. They just looked at the outside and they were like, why are you here? Why are you still here?
The little kid
For months, Fernandez and her children were forced to live in a hotel. And then the Red Cross said they could help.
I spoke to the caseworker who also said that there was, they called the Move-In Assistance Program, and he said that I would be eligible for money to move into a new place and that all my household items would be replaced.
The Red Cross raised more money than any other agency to help the victims of Hurricane Sandy, $308 million. They created the Move-In Assistance Program to help people get back into their storm-damaged homes or to find new ones. They say so far they have spent $15 million helping 2,800 households on that program alone. And the Red Cross says they can give you how much money?
So they said $10,000 They said the max for the household items was about $6,000. The other would be for broker's fees, for deposit, and for the first month's rent.
What did they tell you they needed for you to get the money from the Red Cross?
Find a place, submit a W-9 and the application, and that was all I needed.
And you will get this money as soon
Yes.
as you find a place?
As soon as you find a place.
But that's not what happened. Not for Fernandez or for what current and former Red Cross workers say happened for an estimated 1,000 other Sandy-devastated households. Families who were denied badly needed assistance say they have been promised when the Red Cross suddenly changed the interpretation of its eligibility criteria last May. Ben Smilowitz is a former Red Cross volunteer. He worked Hurricane Katrina. He's the founder of the Disaster Accountability Project, a nonprofit aiming to improve transparency in relief organizations.
There are hundreds of people across New York that were all told that they would be assisted or they were eligible for assistance and did homework for the Red Cross, jumped through hoops to collect information, took days off from work, and only to find out that they weren't eligible in the first place.
People like car parts salesman Tom Clemens. How high was the water here?
Well, I'm 5'8", so if you take, about around where my neck is, it was right around here.
Wow. Clemens' home in Freeport, New York, backs onto a canal. Sandy's tidal surge buckled his dock and sent water flowing through the windows into his first floor. A year later, water-rotted walls are still half gone, and papers are still drying out in what had been his office.
Just like you could say, all right, it's at 1 foot, it's at 2 feet, if it's at 3 feet. And that's when I knew that this is going to be a problem. Anything that I had propped up down here was not high enough. And things floated that I never would have imagined.
These are the documents you sent off to the Red Cross.
Yes, ma'am.
Clemens also applied for Red Cross assistance. I was a victim of Superstorm Sandy. I suffered a financial loss. I suffered damage to my place of residence. I do not have adequate financial resources. I have not been reimbursed or have exhausted payment by insurance government program. And those are all the things that they asked you.
That's it.
That's it. How much do you think it's going to cost you to fix all this?
The way it works is you go around in circles.
He found a contractor who prepared a detailed estimate, pages long, all at the request of the Red Cross. Then he says he got 2 phone calls telling him his application was denied.
That was it, nothing else. I haven't heard from them since. Probably my application's in the garbage bill.
When we return, more of this exclusive America Tonight investigation, part 2 of Sheila McVicker's report. A relief organization adds to the stress after Sandy, uncovering the shift in commitment next. And welcome back. We continue now our America Tonight exclusive investigation by correspondent Sheila McVicker. Sheila now takes us inside the Red Cross with a whistleblower who tells us what happened when the relief agency changed its interpretation of guidelines, leaving hundreds of families without help they believe they had been promised and that they desperately needed. We should add that we did ask the Red Cross for an on-camera interview. The request, though, was declined.
I was in New York working with the Sandy recovery operation for many months.
We're protecting this man's identity and have changed his voice because he still works with the Red Cross. He has direct knowledge of the Move-In Assistance Program. Why have you decided to talk with us?
Clients were promised assistance from the Red Cross, of money that was donated to the Red Cross by the public. These people have now been homeless or displaced for about a year. They were made promises from the Red Cross, and the Red Cross failed to honor these promises.
In the aftermath of Sandy, the Red Cross launched its Move-In Assistance Program last December. Red Cross workers in New York at the time told us they were instructed how to interpret the program criteria. Each case passed through multiple layers of approval until last May. Why were there so many cases where there were people who were in the pipeline and then all of a sudden were not being processed?
The eligibility criteria changed so drastically.
The most the Red Cross has said about this period of time is that they conducted a review of the criteria. Is a review an accurate word?
No.
So this is frequently asked questions, and it seems to date from May. We showed him an internal Red Cross document we were told was intended for Red Cross caseworkers to use as talking points with now disqualified victims. It reads, "We are committed to being good stewards of donated dollars and regularly evaluate our work. We conducted a review as part of that due diligence and to ensure that open cases are following program guidelines." Is that an accurate statement?
No, it is a nice statement, and I believe in general that the Red Cross attempts to be good stewards of the donor dollar. However, the decision that was implemented on May 6th didn't seem to have anything to do with that. There were clients who had received a commitment from the Red Cross for money to assist them in recovering from the storm, but then were deemed ineligible. That's not assisting clients, that's not directing the donor dollar where it should be, that's lying to victims of the storm and survivors of the storm.
The Red Cross insists that the program criteria were consistently applied from February onwards. But that's not what Red Cross workers tell us. We spoke to 2 former and 1 current Red Cross worker. They say that after May 6th, there was so much confusion, they were ordered to not speak to their clients.
Casework effectively stopped for over a week, almost 2 weeks. Caseworkers and case managers were told not to speak with clients.
Not to speak with clients.
Were told not to speak with clients at all. They didn't know how to communicate the changes. They weren't sure of the effect of the changes.
Some Red Cross workers were so upset by having to eventually tell hundreds of clients they were no longer eligible for assistance, they quit their jobs. None of the current or former Red Cross workers we spoke to could tell us why the change in interpretation was made, just that it came from upper management. One former worker described the changes as, quote, arbitrary. At the same time as the Red Cross was disqualifying hundreds of families who believed they were eligible for help, the Red Cross publicized this story: a 95-year-old woman able to return to her storm-damaged home, in part because of Red Cross money. 2 caseworkers told us that under the changed criteria, she and many others who had already been given assistance would have been deemed ineligible and denied funding.
I've never seen this type of behavior from a relief organization. An organization that's supposed to be helping people, that has a track record for helping people, having this type of mess up and inconsistency that's so blatant that numerous staff, as many as 10 employees, coming forward with sensitive information about what happened, frustrated.
At the Disaster Accountability Project, Ben Smilowitz also has collected the stories of dozens of Sandy victims promised and then denied funding by the Red Cross.
Some were actually told that they would get a certain amount of money in the mail and that it was coming in 2 days via FedEx.
So the check's been cut, you're fine, this is what you're going to get.
Yeah, and the check never came. And they had to stop work on their home.
There were hundreds of other cases that were somewhere in the pipeline, where the caseworker was working with a client, had probably given a positive indication to the client that the case was going to be moving forward, that everything looked like it was good, and then the case was then frozen. This was not a small hiccup. These were not small headaches in the program. These were enormous migraines.
In early September, in response to a letter from Congressman Benny Thompson asking for an explanation of changes to the program, the Red Cross told congressional staff members they would review and make good on cases where promises were made. A Red Cross spokesperson told America Tonight, quote, "If clients believe they were promised assistance by a Red Cross caseworker and our documentation supports this, we will honor their request even if they do not fully meet program criteria."
The Red Cross will continue to work with us on Sandy relief.
Last month, at a news conference held on one of the most damaged streets on Long Island, New York's Attorney General said that after investigation of complaints, including from the Disaster Accountability Project, the Red Cross would now contribute more money to helping Sandy victims.
They are working to correct some problems and go back and review cases where people might have been denied relief that maybe should have gotten it.
But America Tonight obtained this internal Red Cross email. We're blurring all names to protect our source. It's dated September 20th and reveals further changes to the implementation of the program, denying more assistance to a storm victim who had previously received a small amount of money and believed she was eligible for more. Her request refused because, quote, "guidelines are being more strictly enforced now."
They never came back.
Laura DeVito is one of those who has had her case reviewed and denied a second time.
And then it started to leak. I am hoping that my boilers will hold out. And if they don't, then I'll borrow money. I'll use my credit cards again.
DeVito was told that she was not eligible now because she did not stay in a hotel paid for by the government after the storm. But she has a pet.
That would have been one of the exceptions that they should have allowed, because most hotels will not take a pet.
Those criteria also fail to consider those who stayed with family or friends, or those who stayed in their damaged homes to protect them, one of the ways in which former workers described the program as arbitrary.
I met the nice teacher.
After a year of uncertainty, after losing her home and almost everything else, Rosaline Fernandez is trying to move forward. She says she feels that door after door has been shut on her and her family. And what hurts most is the refusal of the Red Cross to help. What did you think when you got that phone call saying that you were not going to get that money?
It was wrong. I thought it was wrong. And I said that to him. I said, you know, this is unfair. There was never that idea that I was not going to be eligible. There was never that conversation. It was always, this is, you have met all the requirements to make you eligible. And then all of a sudden the requirements change and now you're no longer eligible.
The New York Attorney General's office is continuing to watch the Red Cross and this program. A spokesman told us they do expect the Red Cross to honor its commitments to the victims of Sandy. Again, we did ask the Red Cross for an on-camera interview, and they declined. Joey?
Sheila, you know, when you hear this sort of story, you're immediately struck by what's happening here. Was the Red Cross running out of money for victims?
We know through an investigation carried out by the New York Attorney General's office that at the time that this change came in the program, they had $110 million in the bank raised for victims of Sandy. If they had honored all of their commitments to this about 1,000 families and given them the maximum allowable, $10,000, that would have been $10 million, which in the scope of things is not a lot of money for the American Red Cross.
So is there any suspicion that somebody's doing something wrong, maybe pocketing funds themselves?
There's no suggestion of that. No suggestion of that whatsoever. But what caseworkers talk about is mismanagement, gross mismanagement, where there was a failure to communicate to workers. And these approvals that took place from the time the program was implemented, from December until May, went through many layers of approval. It's not one or two rogue caseworkers who were making decisions.
I guess there's another way to look at this, and that is, look, this is charity. This is contributions. These are donations from people. Surely these people aren't expecting to receive.
No one expects to receive, but these people were all left in a terrible position. If they had insurance, it paid out pennies on the dollar. Many of them did not get a large amount of money from FEMA. Matter of fact, most of the people we spoke to did not get a large amount of money from FEMA. But they were left in a position where their own homes were uninhabitable. And in cases like Rosaline Fernandez, she made decisions based on what Red Cross workers told her not once, not twice, but over a period of months. She said she would have done things differently if she had known she was not going to get that $10,000, but she counted on it to help her family get back on its feet.
And so did she get any money at all?
You know, I spoke to her this afternoon just before we came on air, and she's still waiting. She's playing telephone tag with a Red Cross worker, and she has no idea if she will get any Red Cross money or not. Again, it's not a question of deserving, it's a question of need. $10,000 to a lot of these families would make a big difference in terms of what they've paid out of pocket, what they've had to borrow from family members or on credit cards. It might just help them a little bit more.
Yeah, it also goes to the people who donated money in the first place. After all, if I wrote a check or did one of those, phone donations, I assumed that money was going to Sandy victims.
Well, one of the parts of the investigation, the New York Attorney General, is to ensure that money was raised, not just by the American Red Cross, but by everybody who was out there raising money for victims of Sandy under the rubric of relief for victims of Sandy, that money actually will be spent that way. And the New York Attorney General's focus is on that in their charities division.
All right, we want to talk now to Jonathan Katz. He's a former Associated Press reporter who's covered some of the biggest disasters in the world. Indeed, has written a book called The Big Truck That Went By: How the World Came to Save Haiti and Left Behind a Disaster. Of course, Jonathan, you're referring to Haiti after the earthquake and the relief that came through on that. Do you see a pattern when you hear Sheila's report? Are there similarities when you're talking about relief agencies handling these enormous disasters?
Yeah, it's very reminiscent. I actually was in New York not long after Sandy as well on Staten Island, and it was amazing the way that people were talking about disaster relief and specifically the American Red Cross. There were a lot of similarities between the way that people were reacting in New York and the way that people reacted on the ground in Haiti and Port-au-Prince after the earthquake in 2010.
Like what?
Well, one of the things is that people know that tons of money is going into the American Red Cross, and I'm being specific about the American Red Cross because there are actually a lot of country organization Red Crosses all over the world.
Indeed.
And it's often not very obvious where that money is going if you're somebody who's been directly affected by the disaster. You often won't see a lot of, or at least as many Red Cross personnel or trucks or even things with their logo on it as you might expect, given the amount that they've raised. So in the case of Haiti, they raised $486 million in the wake of the disaster, which is a tremendous amount of money. It's more than basically any other single organization raised. But they only had about 3 permanent foreign staffers on the ground at the time and a number of Haitians under contract. And when I was writing my book and I was going back and asking why wasn't there a more visible presence on the ground immediately after the disaster, one of the responses that they gave is that there's just only so much money they can push through at any time. It's almost as if they were admitting that they raised more money than they knew what to do with.
So Sheila, in all these cases, and you've seen this other places in the world in disasters as well, good intentions, maybe bad organization, bad management.
I mean, the Red Cross clearly does an exemplary job in some things, no question, blood collection, dealing with families who are disrupted from fire. But in terms of managing large amounts of money, large need after an enormous disaster, we know from Katrina, we know from Irene, from other big disasters, big weather-related disasters in this country, there does seem to be a problem with getting it right and making sure that money gets to people who believe that they were promised that money. That's why you've got this investigation in New York, because there are people who are saying, wait a minute, you told me that you could help me. Right. And now you're telling me you can't. Right. And that's what the issue is.
And last thought to you, Jonathan, on this. You know, there is sort of that expectation that each event, I mean, it produces different donations. People have an expectation. People say, I'm donating to the survivors of Sandy or to Katrina or to the earthquake or any of these things. People have expectations about where, as donors, where our money goes.
Yeah, and the thing is that the American Red Cross it's a big brand name. I wrote a piece after Sandy in which I compared it to Coca-Cola. It's basically the Coca-Cola of disaster relief. People know that it's a brand. They know that it's somebody who's going to be collecting money after a disaster. And they don't stop to ask what should be very basic questions. Do they even have a presence in the country or in the area where they're supposed to be responding? What are they going to do with the money once they get it? And they're a good organization that does a lot of really good things, but until you ask those questions and until you get really good and satisfactory answers to them, it's better to kind of hold off and ask those questions first.
Jonathan Katz, his book is The Big Truck That Went By, How the World Came to Save Haiti and Left Behind a Disaster. Also with us is our America Tonight special correspondent, Sheila McVicker. Thank you both very much for being here. When we return, severed ties, Native children forced into foster care away from their home communities. We preview a Fault Lines investigation coming up next.